WP-Get Web Dev Tutorials for all user levels. What I'm doing today is I'm going to show you how to use this BEM concept or block element modifier naming convention using Elementor. Now, there's a lot of people that say it's not possible. It is. It's different than what you would do with bricks. This is the example I did with bricks yesterday. I'm going to do something similar to this in Elementor and show you how I do that. Now, it is very different, and the reason it's different is because in bricks you've got the class system. So if I click on a block here, I can click on the class and apply settings to that class. We don't have that flexibility in Elementor, so we have to do it a little bit differently, and today I'm going to show you what that looks like. I'm not going to spend too much time on this today on the how-to. I'm just going to show you that it can be done. So let's go back to, where are we? So here's Elementor, and I've got some service blocks which I've just defined, and I've got a featured one here with a modifier which has got a green border and a hover effect which gives you a background box shadow. So this is all done using the same methodology as bricks as far as the naming. Now let's have a look at what that means. So the naming I've done is I've got a services container. Let me just zoom in on that a bit. So I've got a services container, which is the container that encompasses all of these services here. I've got a services block, which is one of these items. I've got some breakpoints on that. I've got a services block -- featured, so that's the modifier, the BEM modifier, and that gives me this green border with the hover effect. And then I've got a services block _ heading, so the same BEM methodology where I've got my block here and my element there. Now in Elementor, here's one of the differences straight away. In bricks, when you add an element to the editor, it adds a single DOM element with that element. In Elementor, it adds a widget wrapper around that. So what we have to do is actually extend this class a little bit to look for the actual element that we want this to apply to. And I'll show you what that means as I work through it. So down here we've got our service block and our image element. Again, it's a wrapper, so we've got to find the image inside there. So that's the extent of that. Now I'm just going to zoom back out. Okay, so let's have a look in Elementor what we do here. So in Elementor, I've got a services container, and I've just got that set to boxed. You can't do much in here because of the way it works. You don't have that same flexibility to add a class and then set settings on the class. So what we have to do is just leave all of the settings on default and just add, in this case, services container. And my services container is here, and I'm setting my display. It's in Elementor, by default, it's flex anyway. Just so that I'll show you why I've done that actually. I'll just bring that back up again. The reason I've manually put the keyword flex on there is so that we can use the Chrome DevTools. So here's my services container. And there's the rule that I created in WP Codebox over here. And by putting the display flex on it in Chrome, you get this little utility here where you can click on that and you can change a lot of the properties here, which automatically creates the rule. You can just right click, copy the rule, paste it into your code editor, in this case WP Codebox, and then you've got your rule. So even though you can't do this with the settings in Elementor, you can do this using the Chrome DevTools anyway, so no great loss. All right, so let's head down from the services container. We've got our services block, and our services block, again, we do nothing here. except for I've set the content to full width. We could have done this with CSS, but it was just easier to do there. And on there, all I've done is add service block. So if we look at our code, we've got a service box, a block, I should say, with a flex spaces of 20, flex grow and shrink, and a border. So that gives us the border here, flex spaces of 20, because we're wrapping from the previous container. So that bases the calculation on this being roughly 20%. It can shrink or grow for that. The reason I do 20% to fit 4 on here is so that it allows some for the row gap that we've got and column gap that we've got here. So, but 20%, it seems to fit 4 quite nicely. In fact, we just look through that. I've got a couple of breaks on that. So if I go to this breakpoint here, I've got 2 across. Look at my code. What I've done is at service block at max width 800. I'll just throw in this number in here just for a demo. I've set the flex basis as 40%. And the idea is that it can fit 2 on this row at 40%, but it can't fit 3. So we'll only stick 2 there, and then it uses the flex rules of grow and shrink to work out how big to make those to fit within that space. So that's what the flex basis does anyway. And at 490, then I tell it to be 100%, which gives me the single column there. So that's pretty much that. All right, so where are we? Go back to this. Was I editing that somewhere? I think I was. Here we go. So my heading, don't change anything here at all except for put the service block __ heading. Image is, again, don't do anything there, just service block __ image there. The text editor is service block __ description. All right, so that's our BEM naming there, right there. And over in the editor, this is where we set what they are. So for example, my service block here, I've got a border of 1 pixel solid, just using black. Let's change that to var color secondary. And come back and have a look. Now we've got our secondary color, which is the orange, unless it's featured. So the modifier, the service block -- featured modifier is changing the border to color primary, which is our green. Okay, so that's exactly what that's doing. Again, we get down to the service block heading. If we look at the actual DOM here, I'll show you why we have to do that. When we look at adding an H2 element or heading element to the editor in Elementor, the level that we can put the class on is this level here. So you can see in there we've got our service block heading, our BEM, or BE at this stage, class name. But that's not where we want to apply the CSS, because it then adds a widget container and then it adds the actual H2. So it's adding, instead of with bricks, it just adds the H2. Elementor, it adds a widget, a wrapper, and then it adds the actual element you want. So we've actually got to target the H2 after the BEM name. All right. Same with the image, exactly the same thing. So when we get to the image, here we've got a service block image here, there, which is the element. It then adds a widget container and then adds the image underneath that. That's something I'm hoping Elementor is going to tidy up in its release, its full release of containers, using less of these wrappers. I don't know if they will or what, but in the meantime, this is how we have to do it. Now, you would have noticed that I'm using some variables here. So my row gap, at the moment, I've got exactly the same as what I did in the bricks video yesterday. So if you haven't looked at, have a look at that. So I've got spacing, SB, responsive, small. Okay, so let's change that to medium. So I've got spacing, responsive, medium for my row gap. Let's actually head over and have a look first. So this is what it looks like at the moment with the spacing and the rows and columns. Once I save this, we head back over, we've got more spacing. All right, if I look at the Chrome DevTools and have a look at my container there. So here's my services container, and I want to look at my row gap. Let's look at the computer value. Let's look at the, where are we? Row gap here. So at the moment, the row gap is 32 pixels. If I bring my viewport width down, I'm on 25 pixels now. If I bring it down further again, it's on 22 pixels. So that's now going to give us 22 between these. So because I've used my responsive spacing variables, it will vary through the different viewport widths. Again, that's something I covered yesterday, so I'm not going to cover that again today. If you don't want it to be responsive, you can use base M. So that's the base value that's not responsive. And then there's our spacing there. So we've got a row gap of 32. And as we go through the row gap, and as we move through there, the row gap stays the same. So they work exactly as they did in the bricks tutorial I put up yesterday. You'll notice I've also got some variables here: color secondary, color primary, text medium, bold, font size, etc. I'm going to do probably a separate tutorial on this tomorrow, because it's actually quite involved. But I'd probably encourage that you do this before even looking at this BEM stuff, because a lot of the variables in Elementor, actually, if we have a look at a page, and we have a look at, say, for example, this color here, and we look at the Elementor variables, so the primary, secondary, and accent are fine. Colors, it gets down to adding these random strings on the end of it, not the names you've given them. Same as your topography, we got primary, secondary, and text and accent. As soon as you start creating different font names or global fonts, you end up with these random strings. So it's pretty hard to know what exactly that is, and showing you what I mean by that. If we look over in our globals, so we've got some global colors here. So I've got colors called, so standard primary, secondary, text and accent. And we've got primary variation, secondary variation, accent variation, white, black, and a few grays. I've used naming on here that's the same as what you would use in CSS. So that when I map them across, this is exactly what we should see. Now the same with the fonts and the global fonts. So primary, secondary, and accent get a correct proper name. The additional fonts that you define get random strings. So in the editor, that topography might be, for the first one there, would be global topography 3C6503F refers to this extra large bold. So what I do is I map those across. So if we look at the CSS, come on, view page source. So what I do is I actually use some SCSS to create a map where I've got some standard names. And we get down to the names that I've created. So text accent. So I've got my extra large bold. So it's text extra large bold, font family, text extra large bold, font size. And it's mapping these random Elementor strings to these names, which relate to the names that I've given to these. So it's easy for me to apply those to custom CSS without having to remember what random string was that. And the way I do that, which I'll go through tomorrow, is a utility class here, SCSS, where I'm looking at my font properties that I want to map, a map of the actual names to the actual name that Elementor has given them. So In this case, I've got extra large bold maps to 3C6503F. If I look in, where is that gone? So this one here, so that's 3C6503F maps to extra large bold. So I'm actually creating variables that make sense to what I've actually named those in the globals. Now, then I can use these anywhere. So once you decide on your model, how are you going to name these fonts? Name them in such a way that the names actually are the same as what you would use in CSS. It doesn't have to be, but this just makes sense so that when you're looking in your CSS rules, I want to look at what is the font size for my extra large normal. I just copy that, go to my CSS code box here, into my services, and let's say I want my font size to be text medium bold font size. All right, so that's just a simple way of mapping these random strings across to readable strings that actually make sense. I've also done the same with the colors. I'll do a separate tutorial on that tomorrow showing how that works, but what I've proved today is that you can use the BEM naming conventions in Elementor to do the same sort of thing you can do in Bricks. You just don't have the flexibility of being able to do that with a class manager inside Elementor, but it's still possible to do to keep those things consistent. So hopefully that's something that you enjoy, and if you're looking forward to it, I will make sure that I put up another tutorial tomorrow showing how I've exactly mapped all of those fonts, all of those colors to make this possible. All right, so thank you, and if you like this kind of thing, please subscribe and please hit the thumbs up. Thank you.